The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Well, if you consider SNL any type of a bellwether for what's culturally relevant, SNL this last week just had Timothée Chalamet on. He was the featured host and musical performer, and it was the last episode in their 50th season, which we believe is Lorne Michaels' last season. But it was the last episode before their 50-year anniversary as a show, and in that episode, they had not one, but two different sketches focused on podcasting. I think we've seen it everywhere. We see it in movies. We see TV shows based around podcasting. We got podcasts on podcasts on podcasts. And this is an industry that we all love. And, we started this show, the Media Roundtable, really to serve the constituency of the marketers that support it all. We call them the Chief Audio Officer. Well, we're doing something different right now, and on the Media Roundtable for the next few weeks, we are launching a new series, a limited edition series called What's a Podcast? And over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to be unpacking what sounds like a really trivial question. It actually almost feels insulting to ask based on some of the gravity and experience with some of the guests that we're going to be having on. And today on our debut panel discussion, certainly not an exception to that. But the reason that we're doing this, just to set the stage a little bit, is because we all got into this for a reason. It may not be the only thing that we do professionally, whether you're a marketer or you work on the research side or you're a publisher or creator, or you work at an agency like me. We all have a vested interest in this industry. And I think as we look back over the last 20, 25 years of the evolution of this medium that we love so much, it's changing. And many of the things that got us here are now facing some new challenges that may prevent it from continuing to be what it was. And that may be a good thing in some ways, but less so in others. And what's important to us on behalf of the Media Roundtable is that we have a really thoughtful assessment of what does it really mean to be a podcast in 2025? And what about the original ideas behind podcasting are really worth preserving and fighting for? You now have the two leading platforms for consumption being YouTube and Spotify, both of which are now heavily focused, obviously, on video. This is starting to change things. The RSS is going away. And with that, it's creating some existential questions about the labels that we use and what those labels mean. And that has implications for all of us, no matter what part of the ecosystem that we're involved with. So while, of course, this is always in service of the Chief Audio Officer, we're also really trying to assess this issue on behalf of all stakeholders. And the other thing is, one of my core beliefs about this industry and what's so beautiful about it is that you can actually use a podcast to convene discussions that have real world implications. And so part of our goal here is to bring in the best minds in the business to have a discussion about what it is, why it is, and what we believe that it should be. And in partnership with Edison Research, we're developing a report that's going to tell you what the marketplace thinks that it is. What do consumers believe about it? And at the end of the series, our plan is to release to the market an informed analysis and white paper about the different views and perspectives. And at least on behalf of our firm, which is now not only Oxford Road, but also Veritone One, we're going to release to you what we ultimately conclude should be a working definition for the industry. So we really want it to be practical and we want it to be open. And you're always invited to contact us and share your views. But here we have the benefit of hearing in long form from some of the leading players in the space. So let me tell you who we have with us today. First of all, I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. I'm also joined by Hillary Ross Schaefer, Vice President of Podcast and YouTube influencer at Veritone One, and as some people call her, the Queen of Podcasting. We have Nick Giorgio, who is the Director of Media and Customer Acquisition at Simply Safe, a very strong brand and pillar of the industry for many years. We have Larry Rosen, who's President at Edison Research and working with us very closely on the market assessment. And then we have James Cridland, who is no stranger to this show, and he continues to be not only a great luminary and advocate for the space, but editor of Pod News and Podcast Business Journal. So first things first, welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you made time to do this and to have this conversation. It seems like such a basic question about what's a podcast, but I have a feeling that we're going to have at least an hour's worth of vigorous discussion about it. So welcome to the Media Roundtable. Okay, first question for the group. Why did you get into this business? What was it that drew you to this thing that we call podcasting? And I'd love to start with you, James. You certainly go back as far as anybody with this.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me on, firstly. Yes, I got into podcasting. I was working for a London radio station, you can tell because of the accent. And we were a music radio station on AM, which was not a thing that was a particular success. So therefore, we wanted to make sure that our content was available on as many different platforms as possible. And we were the first to stream online 24 hours a day in Europe. And I spotted podcasting appearing, and I worked out a way of essentially producing a version of our breakfast show. We did a little bit of algorithmic stuff to do some fun work with that to make sure that you got the interesting stuff. And that was back in very early 2005. And I then ended up speaking at the first podcast conference in London in 2005, where I was shouted at for being from big media and not understanding what podcasting was for. It wasn't for the likes of you. What are you even doing here? So that's how long I've been involved.
That's amazing. And an important part of the discussion that we're going to get into, because there was such a pirate radio protection of the open ecosystem at the beginning that I think you've actually been a great champion for. So it's funny that you took the heat so early on. Thanks for that, James. Hillary, let's go to you.
Thanks, Dan. I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation today, but I found myself in the world of podcasting a little bit by accident. I think like a lot of us did. I was a media buyer at Veritone One, and we happened to have a lot of clients interested in exploring new ways to activate with endorsers. We were doing a lot of legacy endorsement work across a multitude of channels. And we just kept getting this push of more and more, authentic and native endorsement opportunities. And there was this new type of media to buy, podcasting, and I kind of fell in love with it personally as a consumer and as a media buyer. The relationships with partners in the podcasting space were bar none, unlike anything I had experienced previously as a media buyer. And I just dove in headfirst. And I, had the very, very fortunate experience of being at the right place at the right time with clients who were looking to go full speed ahead into this new channel, and have helped to build our podcasting team, our practices, and our methodology for the agency.
And Hillary, when you were doing that, did it become a substitute for a different type of media that advertisers would have otherwise allocated budget toward? What was it the successor of, in your view?
That's a good question. It's always been complementary to other media channels. What we've seen is, the portion of budget being allocated to this channel has continued to grow because it's continued to perform and prove results. Nick's nodding along because we've seen this, exactly with SimpliSafe. And, we've continued to prove this channel out because of the performance results that it drives for our clients.
Love it. Well, on that note, Nick, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And I'm probably going to say exactly what Hillary said, but at SimpliSafe, we're trying to grow, trying to find new media channels to grow, and endorsement radio, specifically conservative endorsement radio, had performed really well for us at early stages back in 2016, 2017. And we knew the power of an endorsement, like Hillary said, and podcast was this new channel with endless scale. Anyone can start a podcast on like a radio frequency or a TV network. And, some podcasters drew huge audience really quickly, and we were able to capture those audiences. And I think one unique part for us is we're able to overtake the category and lock out some of our competitors by getting exclusivity. So that was really exciting to us, knowing we have some competitors that have been around for a long time.
So there was an incremental benefit of kind of the turf war aspect of the endorsement.
Yeah.
And just following that thread, Nick, you've seen a lot of the rules changing for exclusivities and, how that has evolved. What's your view on when you came into the channel versus now on what the rules are and what they should be for that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's no set rule in the industry, right? Certain podcasts or certain networks have, there's complete category exclusivity, there's episodic exclusivity. I think it really comes down to the relationship that you build with the network and the host. And a lot of times the hosts only want to work with one partner because the endorsement's more powerful and it leads to a better partnership. So case by case, certainly I think there's more money out there for the podcasters if they can have, multiple advertisers in the same category. But we found that exclusivity has held strong for us over the years. Thanks to Hillary and team, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, I was going to just chime in really quickly on that point, but, we like to say everything's negotiable, right? And so as Nick mentioned, there isn't one set way to approach exclusivity. We find that there's a lot of, host integrity on the line here. As podcasting's evolved and as programmatics come into the world, as, dynamics really kind of taken off, we have seen a lot of changes in terms of how exclusivity is managed on the hosting platform level, on the network level, and on the buy side level too. But everything's, malleable, and we do negotiate different levels of exclusivity depending on the situation, and depending on what the partners are ultimately trying to achieve.
There's a lot more to unpack with that one, but we'll park that for now. Larry, I'd love to hear about your journey into podcasting.
Yeah, so I guess I came in two ways. One is just as a consumer. I've always been a fan of what then was spoken word radio. For me, particularly some of the weekend shows on public radio, This American Life, Wait, Don't Tell Me. So I was thrilled, and I only ever heard them when I happened to be in the car, I happened to be available when they were on. So I was thrilled when this new technology came along that allowed me to listen really at my computer. I was not doing the podcasting thing per se of taking the file, moving it over to a iPod, but just listening on my computer. And then simultaneous to that, we started measuring the space with our infinite dial studies going back to, I think, 2005. So we were, getting to know the industry and tracking it along with our surveys. And then learned about it along the way. And I wanted to add that I learned about Simply Safe through podcasting, and my wife and I bought a second home, and we equipped it with Simply Safe technology and used the promo code, and saved a little money along the way. So at least sample size of one there, a success story for Nick.
So I'll just quickly share my background. So I love the view we have at the office, because right behind me is the 405. I don't know if you can see the traffic right now, but the 405 exchange with the 101 in Southern California. This is where I learned to love talk radio, because I was a production assistant running tapes around LA for a production company that made History Channel documentaries coming right out of college. And I spent so much time in traffic that I got sick of hearing the same songs on the FM dial. And then one day I figured out there was an AM button. And I thought the conversation was so much more interesting when you went to the spoken word and talk radio. And I got a little bit obsessed with it. And when I found out you could actually earn a living by just introducing advertisers to the vehicle, and that they'd let you write the ads and figure out the schedules and try to see how to get consumers to respond, I thought it was the most exciting thing in the world. But as I worked in the business, and I worked for what at the time was the largest talk radio station, KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk radio, we had one of the hosts came in to talk to the sales team. His name was John Cobelt of the John and Ken Show. And he shared an anecdote with us from the early days of his show, where he and his partner Ken would do a new topic every hour in a 3-hour show every day of the year. So they'd cover about 1,000 different topics. What they figured out was, based on the market dynamics in a limited geography with the constraints of terrestrial radio, the fewer topics they covered, the more ratings they got. So they ended up narrowing down to like 3 subjects that they would hit on every single day. And I actually thought that was a tragedy, because the canvas of the spoken word and the ability to explore so many different things was being bottlenecked by this kind of forced market dynamic that you could only listen to content on a few different stations, and they all had to compete with each other. So all they could do is kind of play the hits, so to speak, on talk radio. So when I heard in 2005 about what was happening with podcasting, I thought, this is it. This is the answer. And the revolution that ended up becoming a real renaissance in audio content was just starting to take shape. And I knew I wanted to be a part of it, because I thought that was it really presented so many fewer limitations on what could be done with the spoken word, and correspondingly better opportunities for brands who didn't have to only find commercial benefit on conservative talk radio only. You could go wider than that. You could go into things that were more topical based on your product, and make sure that you could make sure that whatever your values or views are, if you needed to, you could have alignment between your values and your business objectives if what was available to you didn't happen to fit. So I really came into this through passion, and I think that's a through line that I'm hearing here, is that this had something unique for all of us, whether that was commercially, but also certainly the insurgent spirit of the medium. So I want to move to the core question at hand here, which is, what's a podcast? And like I said, it sounds insulting talking to luminaries such as yourselves. I know that many of you have spoken about this publicly many times, but I think part of the conversation here today is as much for posterity and defining the future as it is about just repeating something that may be available through different fragmented platforms. So Hillary, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, you want to take first shot?
I will start peeling back some of the layers of the onion that I think we'll all be getting into here. But I think the definition of a podcast is both incredibly simple and complex at the same time. A podcast, in my opinion, is long form or short form, narrative driven content. I think that I think podcasting is agnostic to the platform that it is being consumed on, which is a really big passion point of mine. And I think definitely something we'll continue to unpack together today as a group. And podcasting, is a on-demand medium. People are self-selecting to listen to the content that they're choosing. And creators, Dan, as you were mentioning, have a lot of creative liberty around what it is they're creating, how they're crafting their message, how they're crafting the content, the depth or types of topics that they're talking about, and how they're doing their ads, right? How they're partnering with brands, how they're incorporating that into the fold too. I know a big thing that we'll dig in on here is, the changes that podcasting has experienced. I know for a long time, there was a lot of focus on the concept of RSS feeds being inherently intertwined with the definition of a podcast. And like I mentioned, I do think that podcasting is platform agnostic. I don't think that is fundamental to the definition of what is a podcast. And I think it does span much more than that. But I'll pause on my definition here, since I think we're all going to kind of peel back these layers, but excited to continue the chat here.
Absolutely. Okay, Larry, you want to go next?
Well, yeah, I mean, had I gone first, I probably would have said something very similar to what Hillary just said. I am very much looking forward to this process that we're working on together, Dan, in the sense of, I think industry people are going to answer that one way. I mean, I don't know that the average consumer knows the letters RSS necessarily and what they even mean. So putting together what people like we will all say in terms of, understanding it at sort of the technical end, and then looking at consumers and how they answer the same question and trying to blend those together, because I think Hillary nailed it when she said it's both simple and complex at the same time. It's an audio show, an audio file that can be separated from the time element of a radio show. But it can certainly mean lots of other things. And I will tell you myself that I will sometimes be consuming content and not even sure myself if I'm consuming a podcast or not. So it's complicated. And that'll be part of the fun of trying to understand over the next several months as we work on this.
Well, and what's amazing is I've just been talking to a lot of people in preparation for this is if I ask 10 different people, a lot of them will give me similar answers, and then some of them will be wildly different, but they all think it's kind of commonly understood. And, like somebody will say, well, it's a show. So why, it can be anything you want, right? But that gets slippery really fast, right? So I think the precision is going to have a lot of value if we can land on something. Nick, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think, again, my answer will be similar to Larry and Hillary. I think that the technical answer is a podcast is an audio show or an audio version of content. But from a podcast brand side of things, I think it's a little mini media company, every podcast, and they have their audience, and that's what makes it valuable. And they can target them via audio, which would be the podcast. They can do live shows, they can do newsletters, they can do short form clips on Meta and paid social. So I think when you hear a influencer or creator has a podcast, it can mean they have more than just the audio show. And as a brand, we're trying to reach the audience across all those channels that podcaster might have.
So, Nick, one of the things I want to dig into with you for just a second is because Simply Safe, you're pretty much platform agnostic and, program agnostic, right? You run a lot of different types of media. And I think one of the reasons this is such an important topic for the industry is because brands need definitions so that they know how to allocate budgets, right? Platforms and systems that you end up using as part of your ways of setting schedules and budgets depends on, well, how do you categorize the media, right? Are there other types of media that you over time have found are butting into what you maybe used to consider a podcast that are creating a little confusion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Hillary works on YouTube Influencer, and we would historically consider that its own siloed channel where YouTubers were on YouTube and podcasters were on the audio side of things, but those have blurred together, and every podcaster has a YouTube channel. Some of the bigger YouTubers have a podcast, so certainly it's blurred the lines, but it can be good in some ways where you can reach an audience through two different channels. But I think if you're allocating budgets and looking to test into podcast, you can go the programmatic canned audio targeted way, or you can invest in host reads with personal endorsements, which I think is the most valuable aspect from a brand side.
And how would you describe the difference in that value? I happen to agree with you, but just as a marketer, when you look at that, when you think of the opportunity that the channel provides, spot buying versus the talent relationship and endorsement, is there some sort of ratio you would apply to the value to the business?
For Simply Safe, we invest heavily in endorsement, radio, podcast, influencer, and canned audio. Whether it's radio, terrestrial radio, or the programmatic podcast buying we're talking about, we've had difficulty scaling it, but Hillary will tell you we keep testing and we're trying to find ways to get it to work. But from a ROI standpoint, the endorsement side of things are much better for us.
Much more significant.
Yeah.
Okay, pop quiz. Have you ever heard of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John. We could go on. I don't just host the Media Roundtable podcast, but I have the good fortune of being the CEO of a company called Oxford Road, where we are the world's leading independently owned and operated agency specializing in audio. Think podcasts, radio, and streaming. And what that means is that we get to help great companies worth fighting for, grow with audio advertising, whether it's podcast, radio, or streaming, and all its various tentacles. This includes media planning and buying. We do analytics, attribution, and insights. We also have a special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. It's our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Bottom line is we don't just work here. Audio is our passion, and we want to lead this industry to new heights beyond what we've ever seen so far. That's why we've been leading the industry in brand safety and suitability and actually bringing you solutions to market so that you can evaluate the way that you get placed in a show so that it matches up with your values, in addition to avoiding the things that might be problematic for your brand. If you're a chief audio officer and you're looking to get best in market performance at maximum viable scale, do get in touch with us at oxfordroad.com. Or if you love audio and are strategic, relentless, and looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as a fellow agent of influence. Just flip us your resume through oxfordroad.com. And if you're working anywhere in the audio industry and you're serious about this business, make sure you go to oxfordroad.com, easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, at oxfordroad.com. And make sure you mention that you heard about us on the Media Roundtable podcast.
Great. All right. Well, James, I want to give you the floor here, and I know you have feelings. So let her rip.
Well, what is a podcast? It depends who you ask. That's the answer.
That's the problem. That is the problem.
So, if you talk to podcasters, they will say that a podcast is something with an audio file, MP3 format audio file without DRM, available for download, and comes to you using an RSS feed. And that's a very technical, dull, and tedious answer, but that's what a lot of podcasters think. But if you talk to listeners, then, I mean, as Larry will tell you, most people say that they listen to podcasts on YouTube. YouTube is most definitely not a technical podcast app. So it really depends on who you're talking to. To me, it comes down to a little bit more around format, around what you expect a podcast to be. My answer, if somebody asks what a podcast is it's on-demand audio, like a radio show, but on demand. Now, you can add video to that. That's called a video podcast, and that's absolutely fine. But it should work if you close your eyes. So that's one thing. But that's really all that it is. So the on-demand thing is really important. That's one of the definitions of what a podcast is. The audio bit, I think, massively important, because podcasting's unique selling point has always been that it's something for your ears when your eyes are busy. And I think we overlook that at our peril. And the like a radio show bit, it's not great, but at least it explains that it's not a Spotify playlist. It's not Pandora. It's a human connection with a shared experience, which is what all great radio is and why you got interested in radio in the first place. So I think that whole, the answer really, a podcast is on-demand audio, like a radio show, but on demand. What concerns me, and I've heard even somebody at the BBC saying this, is a podcast is a long-form interview, isn't it? And I'm there going, no, it's absolutely not. But even the BBC believes that. So it's a weird and wonderful thing. But so what is a podcast? It depends who you ask.
Well, and James, you know the voices in the space. There are people that might take real issue with this. I'm trying to get Adam Curry back on the program to engage with this discussion. And I'd love for him to come on with some modern broadcasters that are creating new definitions to just hear a little bit of that banter. But wouldn't many say that, you're really kind of selling out the medium when you detach it from the RSS?
I don't think so. I mean, the first podcast in the world didn't use RSS. It was available. Robin Williams ended up making it audible back a long time ago. That was a podcast. It was a piece of on-demand audio that you could get and download and take away on a Audible receiver. That didn't use RSS. I don't think that the technology is that important. And just ask the radio industry. What is radio? Is it AM, FM, or is it streaming, or is it satellite, or is it a bit of all of those? I think the technology conversation is different, but I think from a point of view of what is a podcast, audio first is the most important thing, and a piece of on-demand content that ideally you can download and take with you. That to me is the fundamentals, and I think RSS. It's important to us for lots of other reasons, because it's open, because it allows, anyone to be on whatever platform they want to. But at the end of the day, that's probably not what a podcast is from my point of view.
Well, by the way, that's the first time I've ever heard that piece of audio history about Robin Williams. Can you say more about that?
I mean, this was back in January 2000. There's if you do a search for Robin Williams on the Pod News website, then you'll find a link to it. But it's a wonderful piece of. I've got some YouTube of him talking to a clearly befuddled Jay Leno about what this whole thing is, and he doesn't have the faintest idea. And at one point, Robin says, "It's like radio, but it's on this thing," and he was showing an Audible portable player. And Jay Leno finally goes, "Oh, so it's like radio." "Yes, it's like radio," says Robin Williams. Brilliant. I mean, it's a fascinating watch. But yeah, so that was back in, and now I should say, this really annoys the podcast OG, who believe that podcasting started with Dave Weiner and Adam Curry, with the RSS feed.
Well, that's what's in the history books,
and all of that.
And not to take away from that, because it was significant.
No. And RSS is a hugely important part of why we are all here, and and the openness of the industry. But at the end of the day, if you go back and you have a look at what Robin Williams was doing, the show was called Robin Williams at Audible.com, and it was essentially him interviewing his showbiz buddies in his house in San Francisco. We'll link to a little clip, for example, of him interviewing David Crosby, and he's doing some of the funny voices, but it's very clearly what you or I would call a podcast these days. And you could download it onto your Audible mobile player. If it was sitting in its dock, the Audible desktop software, I know, would download the audio, make it available on your mobile player so you could take it with you. It's what a podcast is, really. So I've completely rewritten the history books.
I can't believe this is the first time I've heard it. You know, have 2 decades of this, and I had no idea. Am I the only one here, guys? What's happening? So, you know,
and they are brilliant, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and I think, look, we both know what a great contribution, you know, the Podfather Adam Curry did make, and his partner, and really advocating with Steve Jobs to really make it commercially viable and available. I don't think we get to where we are, at least on this timeline, had it not been for that, right? But what an important part of the history that I had absolutely no idea.
But yeah, you know, so I think to come back to it, that is a format, and that's a format that you or I would recognize. Somebody recording in their house, interviews with their favorite stars, with their buddy friends. That is absolutely what many large podcasts are these days. And the fact that Robin Williams was doing that in 2000, way before the word podcast was coined, and that's a whole other conversation, I think really points to the fact that that is what a podcast is. It's a piece of on-demand audio, like a radio show, but on demand.
But there's a thread inside that I want to pull on, which concerns me when we have these discussions, which gets back to James's comment about what someone at the BBC said about it being interviews. And absolutely a huge part of podcasting is what James was describing Robin Williams doing, and what we're doing right now, right? That image of people with headsets on, talking to each other, and in sort of a loose discussion. But there's this whole other element of podcasting, which I really worry gets lost in the shuffle, and that's the highly edited little masterpieces for your ears, little movies for your brain, if you will, that don't lend itself to what we're also doing right now, which is recording it on, all of us have our cameras on, we're recording it for video. And, that's the one part that I really worry about, the financial element of that, how to make that work, and how many people, got into podcasting as consumers because they heard something magical that was heavily edited, or they're just listening to The Daily from the New York Times, which is edited. The 2 shows I mentioned earlier, This American Life and Wait Don't Tell Me, not easily lent to the video format because they are heavily edited, so they don't transfer easily, except for a static screen or maybe like a PowerPoint style thing that comes out as it rolls out or something like that. And I'm very interested in how this project turns out with regard to what is a podcast, because I think increasingly it does mean just sort of free-form chat of a certain kind, which I hope or believe is a subset of podcasting, but not the whole definition of podcasting. And I worry every day that that's all the definition is becoming.
Yeah, it gets oversimplified for sure. And, I think there's a few different pieces I want to break down with you guys here, particularly related to why people hang on so tightly to the RSS, but really the spirit of that argument, as well as the video piece, because I think that's what some of the leading factors that are creating an issue. The big thing with the RSS that made it different was that you got out from under FCC governance, right? It became something available that anybody could manufacture anywhere, anytime, and it didn't have the restrictive, overly burdensome parameters that publicly available spoken word media previously was constrained by. And I think when people are fighting for RSS, I think, most of us, I think this particular group, we take the more pragmatic view that we need to keep up with, technology, and we don't need to bottleneck an industry based on one mechanism for distribution. But there's also a piece that gets lost easily, and that is that when you limit it to certain large platforms that are run by, when you consolidate the distribution, you start to limit what can be created and what is going to be promoted, and in some cases what will be removed, and you lose that, what I keep referring to as, pirate radio spirit that I think became so attractive to everybody. And so where's the line on that? And can we have a future? And do you see us moving toward a future where we will still have where this content, however we define it, can continue to be available for all without it mattering necessarily what one platform or another thinks of it? Is that actually going away? And is it just going to be limited to a few corporations, just like radio was for, the better part of a century?
I mean, look, you can take a look at the data around how podcasts are consumed, what apps they are being consumed on. And the data that I've got appears to show somewhere in the region of 30%-ish is Apple, 30%-ish is Spotify. YouTube doesn't appear on the data that I have because it doesn't use RSS. So therefore, technically, nothing that you watch on YouTube is a podcast. Let's not even go there. But the other 30 to 40% of that list are all of the other podcast players out there who are all using RSS. And it goes beyond just giving control to a couple of different corporations. It's even saying you don't have to convince a Netflix commissioner to make your podcast. You don't have to convince a program director of, whatever radio station that you are interested in to make a podcast. You can just do it. And most excitingly, you can appear on the same platform as Joe Rogan, the same platform as Serial or S-Town. And that is an amazing thing that only RSS can actually give us. And as soon as you take that away, and as soon as you start putting hurdles in there in terms of whatever each individual platform wants, then it gets harder and harder and harder to actually see where the future of the podcast, medium is actually going. So I think that's one of the real benefits that Dave Winer and Adam Curry have given us when they worked on RSS all those years ago, is that anyone can be on the platform and can be rubbing shoulders with all of the big stars. And that's massively important.
Well, but James, one of the issues here is that as the larger platforms, YouTube, Google, and Spotify, now have most of the consumption, can you really have a commercially viable project if you are not able to distribute on those as well?
Oh, I'm absolutely saying you should be everywhere. You should be on Apple and Spotify and Samsung if they're still doing it, and and et cetera, et cetera. You should absolutely be on as many of those platforms as possible. But the freedom that RSS gives you, the freedom of all of those other, I mean, I think the last time I counted them, there were 192 different podcast apps which were appearing in that list alongside Spotify and Apple. That's tremendous. And there are now podcast apps specifically for audio drama. So Apollo is out there. There's podcast apps that are, essentially specifically for the Bitcoin community, which is what Fountain has become. There are all of these niched down apps now, which are doing some really interesting things with open audio in this way. And we can monetize all of that. And that's a tremendous thing.
So at time of recording, article just came out. Alex Cooper's Call Her Daddy video episodes moved from YouTube to YouTube from Spotify. Did you guys see this? So what's interesting here, I mean, does it really matter? The audio is still going to be available, maybe not. But could this be a signal that when talent shifts from one platform to another, that the platform that is paying the bill is now starting to reintroduce the gates? You know, when I got into this business, when most of us got into this business, NPR, public radio, had done a great job saying we're not gonna put up, we're not going to do the walled garden. We're going to make it available anywhere to everyone, right? And then we went through this phase where iHeart and others, they'd say, you can get this, but only when you go to the iHeart app. Then they figured out that didn't work very well. And so they went back to just saying, well, we're going to go to where the consumers are. Are we seeing a trend where it's now going back again toward limited distribution, where as soon as the creator takes a check from a publisher, they may actually restrict them so that they have to play play by the rules of the person they signed the contract with, or the entity they signed the contract with, and thereby undermine the ability for creators to effectively continue to make something that's available for all?
I would say the trend is actually away from that. I think Spotify took a very hard run at locking content up. And the evidence really is that it didn't work for them, or at least they've moved away from that themselves. And I don't know if there's any Spotify exclusives left. There might be, but the very high profile ones are no longer exclusive. But what's
interesting is, but Sirius, I hear what you're saying, but what I'm saying is Sirius actually may be actually going back in the other direction and making this move.
Yeah. I mean, that was certainly theorized, right? That's what they were doing. But then, and especially as they were pushing an app, but then they sort of pulled back from that as well. And so any momentum they had towards saying, oh, the only way to access this would be on the SiriusXM app, they seem to have reversed that course pretty quickly. So I think it remains a business idea that a lot of people will continue to test. Everyone, I mean, if you had a dime for every time someone said the Netflix of podcasting, you'd be pretty wealthy by now. But at least to date, it really has not taken to try to restrict it. What was it? Luminary?
Luminary. Yeah.
Yep. Luminary tried it as well. And I think they're still out there plugging, but it never had the impact that obviously they hoped it would. So I'm sure people will keep trying, because it's a way to really, if you have the content, but Spotify had it with the single biggest podcast by far, and in the end they decided to open him back up. So
so you think it's a settled issue, and we're not going to see him keep
nothing
going
settled
back
forever. I do think we'll continue to see people try.
I agree with Larry there. I feel like things have moved back in the other direction, where things are more widely available and available for consumption on multiple platforms. And I think part of it is the creators are probably likely demanding some of this because of the impact that it had on their audience size, and therefore their revenue that they were, garnering from their shows, and the discoverability piece. We've heard time and time again from partners that when they are expanding their shows into platforms like YouTube, there's an algorithm at play that we don't have in audio only, ecosystems, that does help get them exposed to net new audiences and net new consumers, which is ultimately good for the bottom line of their show.
Well, I think we've started, we've been flirting with one of the real elephants in the room here, which is video, and I think we need to talk about it. It's really confusing in many cases to know, is something a podcast when there's a video element. Most of the definitions I hear people producing, and even in this discussion, we generally say the word audio. It's an audio based program. It's radio on demand. That was part of how Steve Jobs had originally framed it. And so now you have this whole other element where it's more technically feasible than it used to be to distribute video at scale, and it's easy enough to turn on a camera, and COVID probably expedited our comfort levels with just seeing each other on screens and not worrying more than we need to about production value, right? So where is the line between something that has a video and is a podcast and has a video and isn't? And James, you already suggested some of what you think, so I'll ask you to color that in more last. But who else has a view on this one?
I'll chime in because I really liked James's definition of if you close your eyes, does the content still resonate? Like, are you still engaged? Are you still following along? A lot of video podcasts have all types of production quality associated with it, right? And Larry, you mentioned there's a lot of static logos on screen. There's a lot of there's a lot of really, really highly produced video content out there. But I do like that very simplistic definition of if you close your eyes, does theater of the mind still play out? Can you still follow along? Are you still engaged? Are you still connecting with whatever that content is? Because, at the end of the day, a podcast is more than just interview, like we talked about earlier. And I do think that that is a very, very important point that should remain in the definition here as we continue to shake it out.
And that's where it gets so complex. I've told Dan this anecdote, but my parents both went to Ohio State, and I didn't myself, but I was born a Buckeye, and so they just won the football championship, and I'm excited. And so I go to YouTube to watch highlights, and they're smart, right? So they start sending me people talking about the Buckeyes or talking about the game. And so you click on some of those, and they sure feel like podcasts. I mean, it's often just someone talking, sometimes just one person talking or two people talking to each other. And they all would fit James's test of if you closed your eyes, you probably wouldn't. Now I've left the highlights, so it's just talking about it. So it would pass James's test there. I didn't take the time to find out if these things were attached to an RSS feed. They essentially were podcasts, and I would assume that a consumer would feel the same way. It's people with headsets on or talking in front of a microphone, just the same. And so that's really where I think it starts to really blur. I'm guessing some of these were just YouTube videos and didn't have a podcast attached to them. And if I were just Joe Q consumer, I would think I would have to assume that was a podcast. So it does get it. There's content out there that doesn't really fit James's definition, which I think any consumer would assume is a podcast. I was assuming they were podcasts.
I think that's where you're getting into like the industry definition of podcast versus the consumer's definition of podcast. Because, at the end of the day, the way I look at a lot of this is how am I executing these buys? Like, what is the actual brass tactics that are going on to get that integration approved and out the door and in content, or that ad read embedded into the content of the episode. We had a couple partners early days who had shows that were 100% video, but they act like a podcast, they behaved like a podcast, they had a structured recording schedule, they posted when they were supposed to, and so we treated them like a podcast. And today that would absolutely be considered a vodcast, but back then we had a little bit less trust in the YouTube influencer ecosystem, and so we went about treating those types of integrations like podcast, even though they were in fact 100% video. So I do think that there's, from a buy side, industry side perspective, there's that tactical aspect of all of this too.
Well, and I think that's where the rubber really meets the road. And I'm going to pause because Nick, I think you're about to chime in.
No, I was gonna say exactly again what Hillary said. I think from an advertiser standpoint, it's all about the execution. Mm-hmm. Specifically for our product, writing talking points for an audio only endorsement is much easier than a video with potentially visual elements where you'd have to send product and make sure they're setting up the product properly. Are they going to show B-roll footage? Things along those lines. Are you going to have a logo on screen, a unique URL on screen, a promo code on screen? So certainly the video element has changed the game for us from a creative execution standpoint. And also from a negotiation standpoint. Before it was we'd negotiate CPMs based on downloads? Is it baked in? Is it dynamically ad inserted? Now, sometimes we have to pay extra if we want to be baked into the YouTube portion as well. Versus it used to just kind of be gravy before. We get those extra impressions for free. So it's totally changed the game, but in good and bad ways.
I think the business part is where it really starts to affect, everybody in the industry. And this is where it's so hard, because I can see a lot of momentum toward adopting a definition, as James has described it. Does it work with your eyes closed, right? But when you think about when they're actually counting the revenue in the industry, we talk about it's like podcasting is a $2 billion domestic, $4 billion international business right now. But we don't really have a way to calculate that when you start to factor in all the things that definition applies to because of the YouTube factor. So how do we live?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because as soon as you start, as soon as you start producing video, then things change. And so firstly, it means that women are at a massive disadvantage, because there is pressure on them to be camera ready. We can just turn up in our polo shirts and our scruffy stuff, and nobody cares. But that makes it much harder for women to be involved in this space, which I think is a real shame. But I think certainly once you then have a look at, okay, as soon as you upload a video to Spotify, you lose the audio from that episode altogether. So there's no more programmatic advertising. There's no more, stats that go back to your podcast hosting company. All of that goes away. Even if you choose in Spotify to listen to the audio, you're now only listening to the audio of the video feed that has been updated. So that makes a big change to advertising, in there as well. There's just lots and lots and lots of changes once you start playing around with this. I remember back in 2006, 2007, I was working with a very large radio presenter in the UK, who was actually physically very large, who has now managed to slim down. But he was there on the air when we put cameras into his studio. We put cameras in, and all of a sudden he was just playing up to the 10,000 people who are watching him on the cameras, rather than the 2 million plus that were tuned into him on the radio. And it's just, things subtly change as soon as you start putting cameras in and things. I think it's probably Larry's research, but I have seen some wonderful research which essentially asks people what a podcast is on YouTube, and they come back with the answer: if we can see the microphone, it must be a podcast. And I really like that, because yes, that's probably it, but that also means that Serial, that S-Town, that Dr. Death, all of those shows all of a sudden aren't podcasts anymore. They are podcasts, but as soon as you start putting those onto YouTube, then those turn into documentary shows. So again, what does that mean for where we're going? It's so many questions, and I have so few answers.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, and I think this thing gets really difficult to really, the industry has been growing and growing and growing, but we're now at this inflection point where, I thought it was a tell that this was important when Spotify changed Spotify for podcasters to Spotify for creators. And that made me say to myself, okay, if we're now looking at this like video is a requirement, to your point, there is no Serial, there is no S-Town. We've now completely changed the definition. I mean, turn on Joe Rogan, it's a video and it's an audio thing. There are groups like, some of the most widely consumed shows. The Daily Wire puts a lot of resources behind their visual production. And worse is the complexity of trying to measure all of this. So if you're in Nick's shoes and you're trying to validate the performance that you're seeing from an ad, you have to have one set of attribution metrics that you're using for the audio feed that actually don't translate. With an RSS, we can pixel. We can say, okay, well, we know everywhere that it's distributed, and we'll get a direct apples to apples comparison on performance. But then when it goes onto YouTube, you lose that entirely. And now we're back to telling people to click the link in the show description, or please never go to this vanity URL. By the way, we have a white paper on this called Solving the Audio Attribution Problem, Bonfire. The vanity URL is available at oxfordroad.com so that people don't have to only be limited by a consumer's willingness to actually go to that URL, because we know it's you're only seeing a partial snapshot of the total performance that you're seeing from the ad. So it's a very complicated situation. And I think that as an industry, we need to advocate for measurement mechanisms so that ratings, consumption, and ad performance can be measured in a standardized way, or at least that they can be more complementary, because right now it's a ton of confusion. And we really have to, I think my buddy ChatGPT can do some good modeling for me. If you give it the parameters like what we're describing. In fact, just as a tell, I was trying to do some research to say, well, if you took the attributes of a podcast and something like, if the content holds its weight without the visual element, how much would that change the revenue of the industry? The projection that it gave me was that it's really about a $6 billion, probably today, potentially a $4 to $6 billion domestic business. That's 2 to 3 times what's being reported and what the industry's built around. So we're in a very confusing space. There's a lot of gray area. And I think we need to do more to advocate for some amount of consistency in the way that we're tabulating these things. But I don't see a clear path. So I got 2 more questions. First question is, what's not a podcast that might be mistaken for one? And I know we've covered some of this already, but I want to open the floor to anyone that has a view.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, we're doing this consumer research with you guys, Dan, and, we're going to throw out ideas and ask whether they fit as podcasts or not. I mean, once you get into the YouTube world, does anything that's on YouTube qualify as a podcast, in this world where everything is blurring? So would sports highlights be considered a podcast? Would do-it-yourself videos because or cat funny things cats do or whatever are
right?
Will the consumer see basically anything, any sort of creator driven content as a podcast? I don't know. I mean, that's why you do the research to find out where is that line. I think most consumers of podcasts would understand any kind of audio structure as a podcast of a kind, but I think it's really where it gets confusing. Like I said, I get confused myself plenty when you venture into the video-based world.
For us, again, back to the execution, the word I keep using, a podcast is a media channel where we're inserting an audio creative, a audio first creative, whether that's a first person endorsement, a host endorsement, or a canned voiced ad via a programmatic partner. But agree with Larry, when as a consumer, it's totally different. So, I think it's really blurry, and 10 consumers might have 10 different answers. But from a advertiser and vendor side of things, it's an audio ad from an execution standpoint.
To kind of piggyback off of Nick's note there a little bit, we look at a lot of our podcast campaigns as something that can run without pre-approval, right? Unless a client has the need for that, or that's like specified as part of our campaign brief. For the most part, our campaigns and podcasting run, creators receive copy points or a script, they read it, it gets integrated into their podcast content, and then we receive an air check and we do compliance on post. For us with video first entities, especially those that are 100% video, there's a creator desire to actually provide that integration in advance for review and approval. And that's because of the impact that the algorithm has. And they're very motivated by the impact that the algorithm has for them in that video oriented capacity. And so they want to make sure that when they're posting their video, it's good, it's compliant, and it could stay live. Otherwise, it impacts their views, their monetization, and all of that. And so, we also see a pretty big delineation there from just the actual execution piece of it all.
So here's the kind of macro issue here is, why does this even matter? Is this just us having fun with language and redefining words, or does it have, what is the impact on things that are important to all of us? And James, I'll let you open it up.
I mean, I think it matters because at the moment we have a specific product which offers things for your ears when your eyes are busy. You can listen to a podcast as you're driving down that big road behind you, Dan. You can listen to a podcast as you do the dishes. You can listen to a podcast as you are doing the gardening or whatever it is that you end up doing. That is not something that always works with video. And if what we're doing is taking the unique selling point of a podcast, that you can consume it while you're doing other things, if we're taking that and throwing that away by ending up just making more video and joining everybody else who's making a ton of video, then I just wonder who that's serving. Because I'm not sure it's serving the audience. I'm not sure it's serving the creator. Because all of a sudden we just end up being an also-ran with a ton of other people who are making cheap TV. So I think there is a real opportunity for audio first stuff that works if you close your eyes. And it worries me that a podcast is firstly seen as something that is video first, which is really clearly not what I would consider to be a podcast. And it also worries me that we're essentially throwing the very thing that makes this medium work, the fact that it is an audio first piece of media, we're throwing that away, and there is no difference between us and the other millions and millions of people who are making cheap television on YouTube. That's a real concern for me there. Podcasting can offer so much more, and the success of things like Serial or the success of things like Dr. Death are not just for people talking in front of overly large microphones. There is more to podcasting than that, and I worry that we will lose all of that stuff if we don't really focus on what makes us different and why a podcast is a podcast and not just a YouTube video.
Yeah, it's an art form, and different mediums have different constraints, and in this particular one, the industry really grew, and we saw the renaissance and the cultural phenomenon that I think grew out of the constraint that the visual wasn't important. And we've used the term theater of the mind quite a bit here, but there's no production capabilities that will ever be able to replace the ones in our brains, right? And so just thinking about the quality of the content and what it's there to do, if everybody feels that they can't be successful unless they pay attention to video and they are only manufacturing to play toward the camera, yeah, we end up with something that's fundamentally very different.
I'll chime in. I think, I'm very aligned with everything that Dan, you and James were just talking about, especially, the impact of the low barrier to entry to creating content, right? I think that's why we've seen a podcast for everyone, for every niche, for, every type of consumer out there. I will say, a theme that I don't really think we've touched on too much today, but I do think is important to highlight is, that volume of content. for years, every day, my inbox would be full of a new show announcement from every partner out there. And the last few years, that's slowed down dramatically. I think it's more expensive to create podcasts now. There's been a consolidation around the talent agents and how their involvement is for pitching podcast deals and just the ability to scale shows. And so I do think that there's a point to be said about the expansion into video as a way to just continue to grow this ecosystem, because we're not seeing net new content. We're seeing net new consumption platforms really taking off, and more ways to engage with creators. We also had a lull in live events for a while because of the pandemic. Those are back, and back with a passion that I really haven't seen in a very long time. Speaking of Call Her Daddy, I recently attended one of their live podcast tapings, and that is a fan base unlike anything else I have seen before. And so, seeing creators being able to connect with their audiences, their fans in all these different capacities, I do think is really important, and definitely kind of ties back into that fundamental zeitgeist of what is a podcast, what is a podcaster, and how are they continuing to, expand their sphere of influence.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen the contraction of product as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's like, why are we moving backwards? We had so much momentum, but also we aren't all sitting around our houses in the same way we might have been during COVID. And, I think there were a lot of opportunists that came into the marketplace. And, one of the beautiful things is that now people have learned that you can't just be famous and interview your friends and be the next Joe Rogan and get the Joe Rogan sized checks. And so I feel like the future may favor the real true believers in a way like that fueled it before. But certainly, I think you touched on a really important point that I want to underscore here, which is, audio platforms have not yet proven that they can be successful in helping build audience and promote. And if video has done anything to serve the audio platform, it is or the podcast industry, it's that it's given it a way to chop it up and promote it in ways that we didn't see before. This too is a double-edged sword, but we do need to acknowledge the benefit of that.
I was going to say, I think there'll always be a place for audio consumption. I think there was radio and then there was podcasts. And I think if you're driving in your car or even if you're listening to the YouTube version, sometimes I will have a YouTube podcast up, but I'm still walking around the house doing things. So I think there will always be consumption of audio only. But I think from a creator standpoint, the creator-driven or celebrity-driven shows are going to have to rely more on video and social and other means to reach their audiences. But the true crime genres, the news genres, where you can get the story or the message across in audio, I think those will survive and continue to have success. But I think the personality-driven, not the less of the storytelling, video and social and YouTube are going to be more important over time.
Great perspective. And it's so nice to hear from, an actual chief audio officer in this discussion. And, it's so interesting to hear all of the alignment from different stakeholders across the ecosystem, right? And that's a big part of what we're trying to do in this exploration. Larry, we'll give you last word.
Well, I'm just excited for this exploration and, talking to smart people like the people on the panel today and getting a sense for the answers to these things. I love the answers about why it's important. I think all this stuff is just so exciting, just what we've been able to watch over the last decade or so of, talented people being able to explore their talents and bring so much content to people that, the gatekeepers of before you talked earlier about, the handful of things that a broadcaster could do to get the kind of ratings they needed to work on the radio. But, a world where people can be so creative and find their audience in so many ways. So, it's fun to work in a dynamic space where things are constantly changing and evolving. So I look forward to what this project turns up for us.
Indeed. Well, It's an important work, and I'm glad that you're all being a part of the conversation. And my hope is that the parts of this that we've already identified here that have really given us so much passion for this industry, that we can preserve those things. And I think the commercial benefits follow, but we have to start with, the heart of it and what got us all into this. And I think, this is an industry that was built on disruption and something new that wasn't available to consumers before. And we want to hold on to that. And we don't want to see it just turn into terrestrial radio over time, which it certainly can do if we're not thoughtful about how we manage it, even as we're all trying to chase a buck. So thank you to everybody here. This is the first installment of several in What's a Podcast as part of the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road and Veritone One. If you're a marketer and you want to learn more about what we do, go to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. If you want to send us your view of what a podcast is, or you have a suggestion for the show on any level, email us, info@mediaroundtable.com. We have our own email address just for the show. Thank you to all of our guests here today, Larry, Hillary, Nick, and James, and special thanks to everybody who worked so hard behind the scenes, Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly.
McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. Tender, juicy, and its own sauce. Would you look at that? Well, you can't see it, but trust me, it looks delicious. New McCrispy strips, now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Introducing Instagram Teen Accounts, a new way to keep your teen safer as they grow. Like making sure they always have their seatbelt on.
All right, buckle up. Good job.
New Instagram Teen Accounts. Automatic protections for who can contact your teen and the content they can see.
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.